Do we have a John Holdsworth in the room and a Samantha Hook? No, not yet? Okay, they might still come because they're the fourth and the fifth speaker of the session. I'll check again later.
If anyone stayed for the entire session, we'd love it if you would go right up the front, all our people to come and go at the back.
And if you're brave enough to come to the front, we'll allow you time to go to the next session if you want to leave the room, so you don't have to be embarrassed and skip out the back. So please come to the front. We'll allow a couple of minutes to do that after each speaker. We'll get started in 1 minute, so we'll start on time, if that's right. And for the speakers, I'll give you a 5-minute warning and then a 1-minute warning. I'll try to remember. Right. Please come to the front of the room if you can, because people keep straggling in, and they. Oh, you're going to go to somewhere else? That's fine.
Hearing instructions, we'll be back.
Okay, good. Well, we might start the session then. Welcome to the afternoon session. My name's Ingrid Van Putten, and I'm chairing the session now, and I think I'm also chairing the next one later this afternoon in the same room. So welcome all. I hope you had a good lunch. I definitely enjoyed it. So this session is on harnessing recreational fishing stewardship, leadership and advocacy. And we're going to kick off with James Florisson from Recreational West, who'll be talking about King Reef. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid, and g'day everyone. I'm really excited to be speaking in the first in-person one since Canada. Really looking forward to it. Today I'm going to be talking about the efficacy of integrated artificial reefs using King Reef as a bit of a case study. Is that all right?
Pull them up a little bit because you're much taller than me.
So I've broken quite a few of the PowerPoint rules. I've got about 37 slides, but there is a lot of pretty pictures, so don't worry too much. If I'm talking too fast, just raise your hand because I've got a fair bit to go through, but it's all really exciting stuff. I'd just like to quickly acknowledge some of my co-authors at Recfish West and Curtin University and Woodside Energy for funding me on this trip. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on, particularly the Kulin Nation, and also the Ngalama and Yindabandi mob from the country in which I operate, up in the Pilbara region of WA. And all the staff at Recfish West, a passion of fishing drives us. We like to have a slide of us at the start of most of our presentations. And I saw Andy's talk in this room earlier this morning, and almost everyone raised their hands as a rec fisher, so that was pretty exciting. So Recfish West, we're a non-for-profit independent peak body for recreational fishing in WA, and we represent about 750,000 fishers, and that's our purpose and commitment there. I'm lucky enough to live in the better third of the country. There's been a lot of talk so far about the best fishing, but it's definitely in WA. We've got over 20,000 kilometres of coastline, including islands. We've got tropical and temperate waters, so sailfish, marlin, coral trout, right down to your southern bluefin tuna, western groper, you name it, we can catch it. 750,000 fishers, which bring in about 2.4 billion annually into our economy. And there's obviously a whole other host of rec fishing values there that a lot of other people are speaking on in this conference too. So whenever we go out and speak to our community and ask them what they want for rec fishing in WA, they always say, more places to fish and more fish to catch, pretty straightforward. And the way we can do that is through marine habitat enhancement, particularly artificial reefs. So the 4 pictures on your left are purpose-built artificial reefs we've put in WA, and the 3 pictures on your right are some of the alternative decommissioning or repurposed assets we're looking at, and we started looking at them in about 2019. So to date, we've got 7 reefs on the sea floor, a lot of those in partnership with the state government through to cover about almost 250,000 square metres of sea floor, and there's almost 2,500 tonnes of structure, and that's just going to increase in the future. So our case study is on King Reef. It's a pretty special reef, and it was the first reef in Australia and probably the Southern Hemisphere as well that integrated purpose-built modules with some of these repurposed assets. So it was a 5-year community vision. Originally it was an application to the Minister for funding through the local game fishing club there. And it sort of grew into a consortium that ended up having about $1 million Australian dollars to spend on the project, and we got these 6 steel units and augmented them with concrete purpose-built modules. This is where they're located, in Exmouth in WA. So they're sort of between the 2 marinas, and the purpose of them there was sort of to have a safe, accessible fishing location. And for those not familiar with Exmouth, on the other side of the cape over here is Ningaloo Reef, which a lot of you may have heard of as the world's largest fringing reef. So this field out here is a Griffin field. It's oil and gas production, and that's where we got these 6 mid-water depth buoys from, which we repurposed, and we took them to the dock down here and we sand and water blasted them. So these structures were used in a operating oil and gas field, but they never touched hydrocarbons or anything nasty or plastic. They were just used as sort of tensioning buoys between a wellhead and the ship that was collecting the oil. So we didn't just dump them in, and we're really not against dumping anything in the marine environment without a lot of sort of design and science and technology to back it up. We made sure we had enough concrete purpose modules in there as well to make sure it was productive, and we also made sure we modified the habitat, so we cut some holes in them to sort of activate the internal cavity, and so fish could swim inside and use that habitat, and also put some louvers on there so we could sort of collect more coral and other structures to grow on it. And this is what they look like now, so they're pretty amazing. We also put a bit of science and thought into the configuration. As fishers, we wanted to make sure that the most boats could access this structure at any time, but there's also some ecological considerations that we take into effect as well. And I love this stuff, but it can be a bit nerdy, so if you want to discuss that more, have a beer with me. So this is what the configuration ended up looking like. We had it perpendicular to the predominant tidal current, so that there'd always be an upwelling of bait and predatory fish. But we also had some of these purpose-built concrete modules in the lee of that current for demersal fish species to use too. So that went in the water in 2018, and ever since before it went in the water, we had a few research questions we wanted to address. So one of those was, how does a biomass and fish assemblage change over time? How does it compare to natural habitats? And what are some of the difference between the structures we put in the water? We did this in partnership with Curtin University, and we had 2 sides of it. We had a citizen science program running using beta remote underwater video systems, or BRUVs, and we also had a professional science program that also looked at ED&A, remote operated vehicle and dive operated vehicle as well. So I'll quickly just go through some of the stats. I'll try and go a bit quick given time, but basically we saw that even with the ROV and the BRUV in both the professional and citizen science programs, that the artificial reef was just way more productive than we ever thought it was going to be. We've seen over 100 species in the first year, and the only sort of habitat that beats us is the sponge beds, which we'd sort of expect as a sort of natural nursery up there. One of our little heroes of the reef is red emperor, a Luke Janus species, and they were never really seen or recorded properly in the area where the reef is, which sits in about 17 metres of water. But very quickly we saw these on our cameras. It wasn't a once-off, we saw them time and time again, and we actually saw them increasing the whole way through. And with the stereo BRUV units, we can actually measure their growth, and we've got a second cohort coming through, and we think this is really an important part of the story because it actually shows some of that productivity on the reef. And just difference between structures, the repurposed modules, the steel towers here, they are much larger than the concrete, but they did perform much better in every way, other than one time period where there was an 80 kilo Queensland groper on one of the modules, so that sort of biased the results a bit. A quick NMDS plot, I won't go into this too much, but this is a pooled data of the fish assemblage through ROV and BRUV, and it's just important to note that the artificial reef in blue acts as a very different ecosystem in similarity to the natural sites, and also that it's changing with time and starting to sort of plateau out now. So a few key points, over 100 species, and 72% of those were benthic, which is also important because it means they're using that habitat residentially. They're staying on there for a long period of time and feeding on there and living there. And we also found it's more, a lot more effective than natural habitats in the area, and that the repurposed modules were sort of acting as the best structures in that field. So this couldn't have been done without the community, and this is where the 37 slides come in now, a few pretty pictures. The Exmouth community were there from the start. We had about 35 volunteers, and we've also got members from the consortium down there, bottom left, standing in front of one of the towers. And this is what it looks like now, 4 years on, so you can't even see any of the concrete or steel. It's a really amazing, productive marine habitat, and the coral growth and that sort of thing is just amazing down there. And most importantly, there's some pretty awesome fish being caught on there as well. So there's been about 4 sailfish now caught and tagged on there, and there's 2 state records pending for golden trevally. So it's really good for avid sport fishers, but given the distance to shore, we're also seeing families and small vessels going out there and having a great time too. So those steel structures came from the Griffin field, and there's a lot of other fields with similar structures on around the Australian coastline, but particularly focused in the northwest of WA. These structures are seen as a bit of an issue for the petroleum industry, but there's a really good opportunity for us in retaining some of these structures. So there's about $45 billion worth of decommissioning needed to happen over the next 50 years, but about $30 billion of that is in WA in the next 10 to 20. So it's enough gear to build 75 Eiffel Towers. And Clace et al. Found out that in a study off California that particularly oil rig jackets are the most productive fish habitats globally. And that's because they basically act as a skyscraper, whereas natural reef is generally, sort of pavement reef and not as productive. We've seen also around Scotland and the North Sea, but also in the northwest shelf of Western Australia, that some commercial fishing effort is as much as 60% quota off pipelines and that sort of thing. So it's a really good opportunity, but we've got to do it responsibly. So these integrated artificial reefs can host a whole series of benefits. The top 3 are just normal artificial reefs do as well, but the beauty of these other integrated artificial reefs is they can be really scaled up, and we can retain habitat. So some of these structures have been out there for 30, 40 years and have a whole range of fish species and coral growing on them. It'd be pretty devastating to blow it up and take it out of the water. There's also an opportunity, instead of getting funding from community and government for some rec fishing initiatives, to get funding from the petroleum industry as well through this. We're really keen to explore this space further. But we're not going to go in blind. We've got a set of principles that weren't pushed by the community or regulators or industry. This is owned by Recfish West, and we really want to stick to them, particularly the first 2 around having a community purpose to it and making sure it's environmental safe and beneficial, and that any of these projects will have an environmental net benefit. So some of the projects we're working on at the moment, off the coast of Onslow, we've got 6 of these monopod structures and 3 of these tripod structures. They've all finished, they've been plugged and abandoned, and we're going to get all the nasty stuff removed so it's bare steel, cut them up and place them on the seafloor and put concrete modules around them. And the reason why we're doing that is, as you can see, the pictures there, the fish life there is just amazing. A study by Curtin University found it to be about 16 times more productive than nearby natural reefs, and it's a pretty special system. So we're working on that now. We're also working on one a bit further offshore in 22 metres. This whole top deck will be removed, taken to Singapore, and then we'll put concrete modules around the bottom part and cut that up too. And again, the fish life on this stuff's just amazing. Another interesting one we've got is actually looking at some terrestrial assets. So we had 7 of these trippers here up in Karratha and cut them into 42 pieces, and we're going to put them in about 35 metres of water and again augment them with concrete modules. Other work we're doing, we're having a bit of input into state and national policy around artificial reefs, particularly given that this alternative decommissioning and integrated artificial reefs is a relatively new space for Australia, and also doing a fair bit of R&D in other areas. And this is our current active projects. So these are funded and underway, and we're going through the permitting process. So we've got 12 up there, but quite a large amount of those are integrated artificial reefs as well. So I try to fly through that a bit. As I said, there was a lot of slides, but you know, I'm really passionate about this, and I think it's a really exciting space. I'd like to see Australia sort of position ourselves somewhere between the North Sea, where you can do nothing, and the Gulf of Mexico and America, where you can do almost everything, and have a really responsible niche, and make sure our community can access these structures and provide all those environmental, social and economic values that comes with that. So thank you very much for your time. Feel free to come ask questions at any time in the conference, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, James. It's really interesting. Yeah, love it. I'm going to give people an opportunity to leave the room if they want to, and for other people to come in while I introduce Jane. So Jane's from the other end of the country. Jane Gallichan? Is it? Gallichan, right. Welcome, Jane. And yeah, from Tarfish, Tasmania. Jane's going to talk about understanding the drivers of successful peak body models. Thank you, Jane. And I think all you have to do...
So I have to... Do I click again? And then that'll go back?
Yeah, and now I think if you click now, it should... No?
Oh, no. So I think I have to click on the name, is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
There we go.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thanks for the introduction, and let me do it all again. I'm the CEO of Tarfish, which is the Tasmanian Association for Recreational Fishing. I'm a one-eyed supporter for the rights and aspirations of Tassie's recreational fishers. And I've been looking into what makes recreational peak bodies successful by examining 3 different models of operation around Australia. And before I go any further, I do want to thank my colleagues at RecFish West in Western Australia, VR Fish in Victoria, and AFANT in the Northern Territory. Without them, these next few slides wouldn't be possible. Okay, so I didn't have a lot of time to prepare this presentation. I'm, like many of you in the room, working for a peak body that's capacity constrained, so you do things as you can and when you can. And so I've started this presentation with a quote, because that's cheating and it burns a bit of time. But it comes from a 2013 report titled A Program to Enhance Membership Participation, Association Health, Innovation and Leadership Succession in the Australian Fishing Industry. An absolute mouthful. It was done by Ian Plowman. And Tarfish, my organisation, was a case study for that particular study. And the quote, I'm not sure how this works. Okay, cool. Sorry. So the quote, whilst a part of it's on there, it goes something like this. Nothing is forever. There are very few associations anywhere in the world that are over 100 years old. Associations form because of a felt need, respond to that need, then they either reinvent themselves in some continuous fashion as circumstances change, or they die. And unless they have adopted a deliberate process of performance measurement and continuous improvement, that death is inevitable. The culture becomes ossified, the external world changes, and the association fails to adapt. I believe that. That's why I'm talking to you today. I am trying to escape an unavoidable death, an inevitable death. So on that cheery note, I'll dive right in. Or I would if I knew how to change the slide. Okay, so what can I share in 10 minutes? Not a great deal. So when I started this project, I was thinking about all the different aspects of a peak body and how it interacts and performs, and I came up with 7. And when I got to writing the report, I added an 8th. I had intended to focus this presentation on outlining how each organisation evidenced their success across those aspects, but to be frank, 10 minutes isn't enough to do one of those jurisdictions justice, let alone all 3. So I've focused this presentation on things I thought some of you may find useful in your own organisations. So it's more of a roadmap of how to get from A to B. All right. So, what is a recreational fishing peak body and what is its job? The primary aim of peak body representation and advocacy work is to influence public or institutional policies and decisions. And a significant problem in arguing for the importance, existence and funding of peak bodies in recreational fishing is the lack of standardisation about how they operate and what it is that they do. So broadly speaking, there are 3 functions that are undertaken by the peak bodies. So number 1 will always be number 1 and will forever remain number 1 is advocacy on behalf of recreational fishers to governments to influence policy and decision making, pretty obvious. They undertake consultation and community education with recreational fishers, and some deliver services to recreational fishers as well. So the scope and how much of each of these that they do is strongly linked to where on the co-management spectrum the jurisdiction they operate in sits. So this is what co-management has to do with it. In Australia, the relationship between the peak body and the state government is firmly linked to the effectiveness of the organisation. More than that, the state government's model of fisheries management determines the available functions or space that the peak body can occupy. This is one of the clearest findings from my project. So, Neville defined co-management, and like definitions, I apologise for doing this, but for anyone who isn't sure what that is, Neville defined co-management as an arrangement in which responsibilities and obligations for sustainable fisheries management are negotiated, shared and delegated between government, fishers and other interest groups or stakeholders. Based on that definition, he identified 4 fisheries management models from highly centralised to decentralised or delegated decision-making and functions along the spectrum, with fishers making more decisions and undertaking more functions as they progress towards co-management. So, by using feedback from both government and participants and the peak bodies from the jurisdictions that I discussed earlier, and then checking them against the performance of functions through management types that was actually identified by Neville. So I encourage anyone who's going through this process to actually seek out that report and have a look. I found a strong correlation between a government's progress towards co-management and how the government perceived or valued the peak body and the roles and functions undertaken by the peak body. So on the left, you can see WRFC. They have a fisheries management authority here in Victoria and they're running this wonderful event. But they also make all the decisions. They do all the consultation and all the promotion and all the service delivery for recreational fishers. That means WRFC has one job, advocacy. Now, being an advocacy organisation is great, particularly if you have independent funding. But if you're funded by a government, it's like you take the cash with your right hand and then you punch the government in the face with your left. Every time you don't agree on a decision. I don't think that's usually the basis for a good, healthy relationship, but it works to a degree. Moving along, we come to AFANT, so our friends in the Northern Territory. They're still very much an advocacy organisation. They're small like me in Tassie. But the thing that's very different in the Northern Territory is how much the Northern Territory government values recreational fishing and recreational fishers' views through their peak body in AFANT. I describe AFANT as a trusted advisor to government. When decisions need to be made, the government is going to AFANT early and they're working through tough discussions together. AFANT also runs the barramundi tagging program and they are undertaking some service delivery for recreational fishers in the NT. Then we come to RecFish West. They're delivering projects and programs. I mean, just look at the scale of the artificial reef program we've just heard about. And they undertake the bulk of consultation with recreational fishers through a service level agreement with governments. So I describe them as a service provider and a valued representative organisation in fisheries management. So regardless of where you sit on the spectrum of co-management, the critical success factors to move from one model to another appear consistent. So if you want to be not where you are and move somewhere else as a peak body, then I have some suggestions for you. So the critical success factors include the preconditions, the catalyst for change and key insights, which includes reducing risks and barriers to change. So that's where I'll head off to next. Let's get some water. All right. Should have done that before I started. But I don't have 37 slides. Sorry. So if you want to move along from one fisheries management model to another, there are two things to start with: essential preconditions and catalyst for change. Essential preconditions. With the government, you must have political will at executive government level. If your minister does not want something to change, it will not change. And you also must have a government intention to want to move further along the co-management spectrum. Without that as well, without those two things, it just simply won't happen. So for a fisher organisation, you've got to recognise that you need to change and you've got to have a board that wants to change. You've got to have really high quality governance, and if I could give any peak body representatives here today one piece of advice: governance, 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 get your governance in order. I know I don't have mine in order, just saying. A fishery organisation must also have sufficient resources and skills to implement and deliver services. So if that's what you want to do, gear up for it. Or ability to negotiate and attract it. You're not going to start with the resources first often, so you've got to be able to negotiate to attract those resources. And that is the next point as well, which is you've got to be able to negotiate with government. If you are at loggerheads with government continuously, if your only advocacy trick is a fight, you are never going to progress along the spectrum. It's that simple. The other thing that is a really massive support is fishers. Fishers themselves that want to have greater participation in fisheries management. Excuse me. Without that as well, what are you doing it for? So having some catalysts for change is really, really helpful. And without a catalyst, change can still occur, but it's usually slower and more iterative. So some of the catalysts for change include the obvious, a change of government or minister. This is one of the best opportunities for rapid change. Just ask anyone from Recfish SA if they're in the room. You know, they were defunded and out on their proverbial. A solid negotiation, a change of government, a change of posture by the department. Co-management was placed back on the agenda. Recfish SA were refunded and with greater responsibility for service delivery, so props to them on that one. Change of government policy or structure. There is nothing more certain than government like to change the name of a department or move offices from time to time, but sometimes it is bigger than that. There may be a policy of full cost recovery across all fisheries management, for example. It may be a merging of statutory authorities or multiple agencies, and it presents a really large opportunity when that happens to try and cadge some services off them. Legislative review or new legislation. I don't know if any of you were in the session in this room earlier where Matty from South Africa spoke about some of the challenges he was having with the cob fishery. And one of them was the fact that their legislation didn't actually facilitate political will to make changes, or it actually prevented changes from happening. So we're very fortunate in Tasmania right now. We've got a legislative review underway. I think it's the first time in 10 or 15 years that's happening, and certainly it's going to be one of my core focus in the next year or so. So crisis or serious fisheries management issues. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Tasmania. We're pretty partial to rock lobster, and we fight with the commercial sector about it a lot. And when there's increased competition for scarce resources, fishers are more likely to want to become involved in the decision making. So this is another solid opportunity for change, a solid catalyst for change. So if they're the essential preconditions and catalysts for change, what are the barriers? Well, it's the reverse of the last two slides. So without political will, without a fisher organisation willing to change, without sufficient resources to change, it won't happen. Or if it does, it will be slow and iterative. Now, tarfish was a case study in 2013. Much of the stuff that I'm presenting to you today was presented to my organisation a decade ago, and I am still where we were a decade ago. So, if I was giving advice to a board about how to get from here to there, which I am, I would say this. Make an assessment of the organisation against the preconditions and catalysts for change, and the organisation's performance of management functions as identified by Neville, 2008, that's the report I was referring to earlier, to understand whether or not your organisation is well positioned to undertake change to a new model. Focus on building a really good relationship with your minister, and it's got to be around finding solutions that work for both parties. Use an external consultant to guide and inform the board through change. Sometimes when you go through this project, board members are actually doing themselves out of a job, because if you go from a peak body with 5 representative organisations and you want to have elected fishers on your board, you're effectively saying we're no longer going to value the role that you've played. So that when boards go through this and they're thinking about the future of an organisation, it's really important that somebody from outside the organisation helps them through the process. The other thing I would suggest is developing a proposal to government based on the purpose and program rather than a funding focus. And I'll thank Andrew West for that wherever he is. And then have a transition plan to a new model and organisational structure. May include a staged approach to over time and with a preferred end goal. And the other thing I'd say, and which I'm very grateful for, is seek additional funding to go through the process. We operate on the smell of an oily rag. We're very heavily capacity constrained as a general rule. So if you can, seek a grant and help the government understand, and that's why you've got to have a really good relationship with your minister as well, because they'll unlock the keys to that. So, I hope it's been informative. If I've got a report that's coming out in a few weeks' time that goes into detail around the success factors for each of the peak bodies in Western Australia, Northern Territory and Victoria. And if anyone would like that after it's published, please let me know and I'll email it to you. Thanks. I'm taking that.
Thank you, Jane, for a great talk, and I'm sure that resource will be handy beyond recreational fishing as well, so that's great. I'll just leave people to leave and to come. There's a bit of a logjam at the door. While people are getting in and out, do we have John Holdsworth? John. And Samantha Hook? Samantha Hook's not in the room? No? Okay. Right. Thank you all. I'll be, I'm just going to introduce the next speaker while the room is filling up again. So we have Lucas Griffin, who's with us from the United States, the University of Massachusetts, and you'll be talking about catch and release in the Seychelles and achieving that through angler stewardship. Thank you. You just have to click on your name and then it should come up. No? Oh, hold on. There you go.
All right, thank you. All right. Thanks for having me. So we talked about some large angler groups there. I'm going to go and talk about an angler group that may be 20, 30, 40 people here. So the talk is going to be about capacity building and catch-release fishery in the Alphonse Island group in the Seychelles. Has anyone been to the Seychelles here and fished? Okay. A few people. And so we're talking about angler stewardship and scientific knowledge co-production. So for those that are out of town, we're going to hop on another flight. North of Madagascar is the Seychelles. And this small little island group, the Alphonse Island in St. Francois. This is a very remote area. There's no township. The only people that are here is the Alphonse Fishing Company, which caters to very high-end fishing clients. So you can think maybe $10,000, $15,000 USD to go here and fish for a week. And then we have the Alphonse NGO, the Island Conservation Society. And this is really where our research angler approach, we incorporate the research anglers in our science here. But it's not just these two groups, it's multiple nonprofits. We include a government agency here. And then also corporate partners. And that really helped us leverage the support of the angling community, which was quite exciting. So the Alphonse Fishing Company, they realized that their success depends on good fish quality. So they had proactive fisheries management here. So catch and release only, fly fishing only. They even tried to limit the pressure to 12 rods per day. And they had best code of conduct through best handling practices in the keep fish wet principles we heard about this morning. So over time, they were actually catching the same amount of fish, and even for some species, they were catching more. But what they started to realize, there was a level of hook shyness. So you'd cast your fly at a fish, the fly would land, the fish would come up, and then turn off of it. And so they became a little bit concerned, and they started a fishing logbook on their own. And so the main species they worked on were the giant trevally. This is why most people come here to fish. We have the Indo-Pacific permit, very difficult to catch. We have the yellow margin triggerfish, chanos, the milkfish. And then we have the mustache triggerfish. And I should note that they have an incredible bonefish fishery here. You can catch very large fish and many fish, upwards of 100 in a day. So we're just going to focus on the fishing logbook of the giant trevally, the main fish that everyone loves to come here to catch. So what's interesting is the guides actually have GPS watches. So every time they catch one of these species, they measure it, they take a location, and so they have amassed all this a massive amount of data. And it wasn't until they partnered with some of these academic institutions like University of Massachusetts where we processed that data. We looked at how the trends of the lengths changed. We looked at the pressure of the fishery. So if you can look on the left here, you see all those little red blobs. Those are the core catch areas for the giant trevally. So we kind of get a better picture of the fishery. And then we can do this for every season. Here's this 3 seasons and see how that changes across every season. So then the question becomes, well, are we catching the same fish or is it a big group, a big population here? So we went ahead and did a pit tagging study. We proposed an external dart tagging study, but it's really important for anglers to show up here, very high-paying clients. They want to have this wild experience. So that's why we did this pit tagging. And then when they catch a giant trevally, they would take a little wand, scan for the pit tag, and see if it was a recapture or if it's a new fish, and they get to tag that fish. So around 1,000 pit tags went out, and about a 5% recapture. So there's quite a bit of fish that we're catching. We're surprised that we thought we're going to catch a lot more of the same fish. Some open population mark and recapture models, around 8,000 individuals around these atolls. But again, that informs how the pressures around the atolls. This is St. Francois. This is the main atoll folks fish for giant trevally. And then we can also look at that in a temporal scale. So here we have giant trevally, how often we catch them across the different months. So 5% recapture, what's happening to the fish that we actually catch and release? So that was another question they brought to us and said, what are the survival rates? What is the behavior impairment of these fish after we release them? So again, we paired up with the research angler approach. The anglers and us, luckily, were able to go catch giant trevally. We took a series of metrics about fight time, temperature. We had air exposure. We looked at behavior impairment through assessments. And then down here in the lower left is an accelerometer biologger. And so we attach these to the base of the tail, and we take 20 minutes and we follow the fish. We open the bail and we let the line out and we follow the fish under these different tests. And we found that the giant trevally is incredibly resilient to angling. So we have overall dynamic body acceleration on the y-axis. It's a common metric for this type of data. And then minutes post-release. And really what you just need to know is they don't really have much behavior impairment after you release them. Around 3 to 5 minutes, their actual swimming performance steadies out. So we have really high survival rates, if not nearly 100% in this fishery. So the next question is, of course, well, what are the giant trevally doing after we release them? Are they staying around the same areas, those red blobs? Are they moving around? Are they leaving the atoll completely? So we tagged around 70 giant trevally, again, with a bunch of angler support. And we monitored them with 70 different acoustic receivers. And so every different color here is a different fish. The yellow dots here are where we tag the giant trevally. So you can see there's quite a bit of connectivity across the atolls. There's fish that are using the reef inside the lagoon as well. And I'm going to boil this down in just to their core use areas. This is their home ranges where they spend 50% of their time. Again, every different color is a different fish. And so you can see there's some fish that are mostly reef fish. There's some fish that are mostly lagoon fish. And if we compare it with the pressure maps that I was talking about, actually about 60 to 70% of the pressure maps overlap with the core use areas of the fish. And so that makes perfect sense, right? There's a lot of institutional knowledge here. This operation has been here for 20, 30 years. So there's a lot of overlap. And this is a bit concerning because, of course, that means, you counter a fish, you throw a fly out to that fish, it's going to turn off. So they were very open to this. We actually closed down different parts of the flats and the reefs for fishing, which is surprising to get a for-profit company to do that. And then we're going to assess how the giant trevally react to these different spatial closures. We also have accelerometers in the fish so we can look at behavior changes. And then we're, again, going to monitor it with those GPS locations from the guides. But in the meantime, there's lots of other very cool fish here, and they have lots of different questions for them. So here's chanos, the milkfish that Andy talked about this morning. They're very difficult to land. So you hook a fish, which takes hours first, and then you might fight that fish upwards of hour to sometimes 3 hours. And so there was this whole myth about these fish not building up lactic acid, and so you could fight them pretty much indefinitely. And so if you ever watched the show Mythbusters back in the early 2000s, I don't know if that's here, but it's a bit of like that. They got excited about, okay, let's test this hypothesis, and we're like, perfect, let's do a little catch and release study informed with fishery. So we took blood from the fish. Again, we had those different air exposure and different behavior assessments. And of course, no surprise, the blood lactate does increase with fight time. And so here we paired with Keep Fish Wet. This was a great opportunity to, again, engage the angler community, kind of come back to the questions they had. And if you see around 20, 30, 40 minutes, that's when that blood lactate increases most rapidly. So we took that opportunity to not just say, okay, yes, they do have these fight responses, but we should really be limiting our fight times to less than 40 minutes. So again, trying to layer in that conservation mindset. And the reason why they're able to fight for so long is they're just massive buccal pumpers. They're respiring a lot of water and recovering. So we had the acoustic array there for giant trevally. So the next step, obviously, was let's go tag a bunch of milkfish. This is a bit more of a transient population. Many people come here to fish for milkfish, but it's so spotty. What's predicting the presence of these milkfish? So we're downloading the receivers right now. So we'll have those results shortly. And the last one I do want to talk about is that bonefish fishery. There's no logbook because they catch so many. But really, we get these huge fish, tons of them. So you don't have to have huge amounts of experience. You come here, you can catch maybe 100, 150. By the end of the week, you're catching 500. So we went out with the different anglers. We wanted to say, okay, even though the population looks extremely robust, very abundant, what's happening on the depredation and post-release mortality level? So we went out, so the gentleman has a fish. We did this whole air exposure because that's common. People like to take photos, even though, the code of conduct, we like to keep the fish in the water. It still happens. So we want to see if that affects the post-release mortality. So I have some colleagues there. We're going out to the flats. They have spinning rods. You're not allowed to use spinning rods here. So we would catch them on fly. And then you would hook a small hook behind the dorsal, and there's a bobber trailing about 3 meters behind the bonefish. And we'd just sit there, we'd follow it slowly from a far distance, and we'd watch if there would be a shark or a giant trevally that would come up and eat that fish off the fishing line. And it was actually pretty surprising. Around 7-10 minutes into following these fish, you'd see all far off in the distance, you see a juvenile lemon shark would get on the scent trail. They'd zigzag, 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 and then take a beeline. And about 50 to 75 meters away, where you normally wouldn't be following the fish at that point, you see a small puff of blood, and they'd reel it back, and there'd be no fish on the end. So about 0% depredation, which was no surprise, but it's, depending on the location, around 12% post-release mortality, which was really surprising. No one thought that was going to be happening. And so we looked at different variables that might be affecting when post-release mortality is occurring. And the biggest driver of this is the distance to the lagoon or the deep water. And so when you're far up on the flat, you're actually 10 times more likely to have a post-release mortality event. And that's really related to the ecology of these juvenile lemon sharks. They're circling around the flats far up, looking for an easy meal, probably just honed in on these bonefish on these different locations. So again, we circle back with the angling community. We have these meetings with these guides. We pinpoint the different locations that this might be more elevated, what to look for, and really encouraging guides to move away from these areas. There's lots of bonefish. You can change your behavior for protecting these bonefish. So in conclusion, we started off with a conservation-oriented group that was really focused on catch and release. They even started fishing logbooks. And then we took multiple cooperative partners, not just academic institutions, but NGOs and even corporate partners to leverage the support of this community. And they really drove the questions, right, about fishing pressure, what was too much, what were the fish doing, and then the physiological and survival impacts of catch and release here. And my favorite part here is the transformative agency this group demonstrated. They really embraced the Keep Fish Wet principles, even more so before we started all this work. They said there's more selective fishing areas, thinking about post-release mortality with bonefish, and they're even open to closures, which is hard to come by for a for-profit group. And with that, I'd love to thank everyone here again, and we'll wait for questions, right? Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
We actually have time for one quick fire one if there's anyone. Yes.
Yeah, look, with your pit tagging of the GTs, did you guys look at tag retention? Because I know that some fish were kind of a bit of like a sprinkler.
Yeah, we didn't hold any giant trevally, but we assume there's high retention. I mean, there's a lot of meat when we put these fish, but yeah.
Thank you. That was very quick, so great. And wonderful place to do work, by the looks of things. That looks pretty amazing. We'll give people a minute or so to change rooms if they want to, although it looks like we've got a pretty stable audience now. Yes, I should have poured it for you, sorry. I'd like to now introduce the next speaker, who's John Holdsworth from Blue Water Marine Research. And John has a very enticing title to his talk, Engaging Recreational Fishers in the Modern World. Please welcome.
Thank you. How do I get this?
Yes, I'll give you a hand. And I'll give you a signal in 5.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I'll try and see it.
Yes. Now, I think we just have to go forward. Hold on. That's not where we want. There we go. There we go. And you can click forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm John Holdsworth, Blue Water Marine Research. I have a company that does recreational harvest surveys in New Zealand, and also does science and policy advice for recreational fishing groups, and have been doing that for 25 years. So Legacy is an outreach vehicle that's intended to engage recreational fishers in the modern world. New Zealand has a population of 5.5 million people. It's an island east of here, about the same latitude, and it's got productive temperate waters and the 4th largest EEZ in the world. And large commercial fisheries, very influential. How does a recreational non-for-profit get some traction? And thanks to Jane for some good introductory comments, because Legacy was formed as a subsidiary from the New Zealand Sport Fishing Council. The Sport Fishing Council has been around for a long time, since 1957. It was an amalgamation of clubs. There's 53 clubs now affiliated with 38,000 affiliated members, and they pay a small fee to the national body for the work that they do. They have a democratic structure. They've got 8 zones, regional zones, and they elect people that go onto the board, and they vote for presidents, and they pass policies, and they have a fisheries management subcommittee that sort of directs advocacy work. Legacy was initially driven by, as an offshoot, by some passionate fishers concerned about declines in abundance, and it was to reach out to individuals, not just clubs. So you're going directly to the individuals, and they could sign up to the database. There was no fee, there was no membership, and we've got 80,000 supporters in our database. And so we're independent of government funding, and we're not a charitable trust, so we don't get tied into some of the constraints that happens with that. And this means that we're agile. Legacy is agile. We spend a lot of money and time developing our branding, not just the Legacy brand, but the other brands you'll see during this presentation. We have a strong focus on our core values and success. So Legacy is a non-profit organisation dedicated to restoring abundance, diversity and health of New Zealand's coastal fisheries. And we're drawing in not just fishers, but also some environmental supporters and things. I can't read all this because I'll run out of time, but we have core values, and successes are what, the widespread public support for restoring abundance and meaningful fisheries management reform. And that's needed in New Zealand, we believe. And it's also to remove some of the destructive bottom contact fishing methods that are currently in use in large areas around the country. Advocacy, Sport Fishing Council is responsible for the main part of the advocacy output, which is high quality submissions, written submissions. That's how the system works, but also engages in the science working groups, so we understand the science behind the management decisions and some of the management processes as well. Whereas Legacy's role is to inform and motivate supporters to engage in the consultation processes, because they're really quite complex. They put out a 50-page discussion document, and you're supposed to digest that somehow. And so we can digest it, and we can put out an online form or something like that where people can put their own comments in, but also support some of the tick the boxes and support the initiatives that we're proposing. And the Legacy also plans and implements these campaigns. For example, snapper in the North Island, very important species, same pink snapper that you get in Port Phillip Bay out here. Blue cod in the South Island, New Zealand only species, endemic species, and tarakihi around the country. We have some research capacity, and we respond quickly to local issues. There was an issue with scallop fishing in northeast New Zealand. We did a baseline survey, and the local tribe put a rahui on, which is a voluntary ban on recreational fishing, which was well respected over the summer. And the pressure went on the minister to do something about restoring the scallop abundance, and they did a more extensive survey of the dredged areas, the commercial areas, and they closed the fishery just before Christmas last year. Yellowtail kingfish research at the Bay of Islands Swordfish Club International Tournament. A lot of Australians have been going there over the years, over 50 years that contest has been going. And we're able to put out a questionnaire if we want to get information quickly. Within a week we can get hundreds of responses, and in this case for rock lobster fishery, crayfish in a particular area, we got valuable observational knowledge from people that have been fishing for over 20 years in that fishery, and we're able to put that into our submissions. This is a big project. It was a 3-year project to challenge the government structure. We've got a very strong ITQ. We've got 93 species. All the important species are individual transferable quotas, and those property rights are fiercely defended by the commercial sector. And there was a process that started to review the quota management system, and they started to tinker around the edges a little bit. And in the end, we decided the only way forward was to develop our own alternative, to put an alternative on the table. And there's a 1-hour TV special that was filmed, that broadcast on national television, The Price of Fish. It's available on YouTube. I suggest you go and have a look and see more about that. There was going to be a talk about rescue fish here, but unfortunately the presenter couldn't make it. So we're being proactive in some areas as well. Education, we've got a fish care program online and on pamphlets and that sort of thing. So maximum respect for the fish that you keep. You look after it, and we're maximising survival on release and minimising the catch of undersized fish. If you're catching undersized fish, move on and don't just sit there. Maximising utilisation of the fish you keep, so that everything that you catch and keep is fully utilised, and minimising the impact on the environment and making sure you're safe. We've put out over 2 million collector cards, printed cards through a corporate partner. with 25 coastal species in Te Reo, which is Maori language and English. Information, and the kids love them, and they can buy packs if they want to do, and we're about to do a shark series as well. And so Legacy is considered a trusted source of information, and the politicians come to us, not so much the officials sometimes. We run a kai-ika project. Kai is food, ika is fish. The fillets on a fish, about 35% of the weight, 65% of the weight of those fish was getting dumped or thrown away. We started a campaign or a project with a fishing club in Auckland where they iced their heads and frames, and they went to local communities in South Auckland to be used as food. The offal gets put into the community gardens. Now there's over 300 tonnes of previously wasted unwanted fish parts that have been donated to the community. And in Polynesian culture, the head is a prize piece of the fish. It's the best part as far as they're concerned, and the distribution's mainly through the Polynesian community in Auckland. And Auckland has the largest Polynesian population of any city in the world. The Hauraki Gulf Alliance started last year to motivate and inspire people to look after the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park. It's a coalition of 89 members, and it's part of our alignment work stream where we're trying to get groups to work together, and we've got businesses and other non-profit associations and environmental groups sort of together to try and restore the Hauraki Gulf. The Hauraki Gulf Marine Park is on the doorstep of Auckland, and there's a lot of passionate commercial, recreational and customary fishers use that area. It's still trawled, Danish seined, purse seined, dredged for scallops, or was before last year, end of last year. The biggest snapper fishery in New Zealand, it's 1,500 tonnes of snapper recreationally caught in the Hauraki Gulf. It's pretty massive. And over the years, there's been a lot of commercial fishing there. There's a spatial plan put in place that has a whole lot of marine protected areas going in, and they're missing out on some of the fisheries management changes that we spent a lot of time in the public consultation meetings trying to get it put through as a package, but it's not coming through as a package. So there has to be a campaign to bring in some of the fisheries management changes, and that's the Hands Off Our Bottom campaign. I haven't got time to go through the funding much, but we've got a broad base of funding. So the public contributions, all that money goes to Sport Fishing Council for advocacy, partners and sponsors. That money goes to raising public awareness and operating costs, and the grants seeking goes to the specific projects that we've been involved in. We have donor-centric communication with our partners, including the very important platinum partners. Some of our gold partners provide invaluable services and facilities as their contribution, while others provide an annual donation, which is significant. And so Legacy, the governance and accountability is supported by New Zealand Sport Fishing Council, which is an elected body, but this is an independent group. It's entrepreneurial and allows for agility and acting quickly. The sort of things Jane was talking about, reinventing yourselves a little bit. It's financially stable. It's got a broad financial base, which isn't dependent on government, and it has a lot of passionate volunteers and very strong leadership and enormous commitment from the founder, Scott McIndoe, and Sam Wilford, the Legacy lead. They've been really, really outstanding. also do timely accounting and reporting. Annual reports and audited accounts are available online for anyone to see, so that's that transparency there. We believe we're a change leader for perceptions and behaviours and a trusted source of information. The media will come to us if there's a fisheries issue and we're on morning breakfast TV or whatever, so that seems to work. We're embracing and supporting Indigenous values, and we're getting feedback from Maori tribes and hapu that they're coming to us with their issues and looking for support. And we're building capacity and reach using contracted professionals and volunteers. So thanks very much.
John, are you happy to take one quick fire question if anyone
Sure.
has any? There is one over there.
Great presentation. So as an outside organization, what is your relationship like with fisheries management? Do you have a relationship? Are you knocking on their door? Are they coming to you? Do you have a standing conversation with them? Basically, what's your agency's relationship with fisheries management like?
I'm one of the key people that does the relationship with the government through the science working group process and gets invited onto some of the management group meetings. They have some collaborative meetings and things like that. The relationship is stressed at times because we push pretty hard when we want to push, and they provide us with such excellent opportunities to come back and give them a push back. We don't want these incremental changes that the commercial fishery commercial fishing lobby allows to happen. We want something that happens more quickly. We've been through the courts, the High Court, the Appeal Court and the Supreme Court in New Zealand over recreational fishing rights. That was before Legacy, but it's a similar coalition that was responsible for that. So sometimes we're a pain, but other times we're quite helpful.
Thank you, John. That's great. I think we've already done the in and out, so that's unless anyone wants to still move to another session. Otherwise, Samantha, come on up. Just briefly introduce Samantha while I get the talk up. So Samantha Hook is from CFAS in, there you are. CFAS in the UK, and Substance.
Yes.
You might have to explain what.
They are a social impact research company that work on the sea angling diary projects, and that's how we're able to investigate physical health and well-being of recreational anglers.
Fantastic, thank you.
Hi, yes, so I am Samantha, and I will be going through this physical health and well-being on recreational anglers. So when we're thinking about, obviously, our motivations and why we may or may not go angling and basically why is it one of the most popular sports, for example, in the UK, we have quite a lot of people that do it. It has that social and economic benefit, but obviously to the individuals, what are those motivations? And actually, can we look at that differently and think about what factors might actually predict why people go fishing and also what impact that has on their health and well-being? So we've done previous studies on things like this, which is on health and well-being, and during COVID, we looked at how restrictions, so not being able to go angling, impacted individual health and well-being during that time. And we found that there was a significant decrease in overall health and well-being during that time for its participants. So that restriction obviously has that impact. But generally, what is the physical health and well-being outputs from doing this activity? And then secondly as well, we were thinking about nature connectedness. So looking at how individuals who go fishing connected with nature. Are they connected with nature more so than maybe the general public? And what are the outputs from that as well? So we can use this model in other areas as well, and maybe look at different sports and think more logically, or different regions, different countries. It's quite an easy model to use to be able to understand what impact recreational angling is having on your population. So starting off with our question here is, does sea angling improve individual health and well-being, and if so, why? And then can this model be used for other engagement with fisheries and the natural environment? So I'd like to just break it down into different questions. And first of all, our general question was, how much does sea angling impact physical activity of participants? Does it increase or have any impact at all? What impact does sea angling have on well-being? Are sea anglers connected to nature? And what else does what else do they do that could impact their health and well-being? So if you've not seen this already, but we run something called the Sea Angling Diary Project, and as part of that we're able to engage with quite a unique group of individuals. So we don't have a sea angling licence in the UK, so it's really hard sometimes to connect with different anglers. So we're quite lucky that we have this diary project, and we also have about 25,000 anglers on a separate database as well. So we're able to use this database and connect with them. So the methods that we used were looking at sea angling profiles. So we sent out a survey and we asked them about their own sea angling profile. We looked at the physical activity and health, and we looked at participant health and well-being, and then also demographics. So quite standard questions to use in this model to basically determine what of these variables could possibly predict the outputs of their health and well-being score. So thinking about our physical health, physical activity and health, so what we did was try and determine how much physical activity, or how physical individuals are when they're participating, and what contribution does that have to their overall recommended activity levels. So in the UK we use a standard of 150 minutes or 2.5 hours of intense or moderate to intense physical activity per week. So that's where it increases your heart rate. And if you think about the demographics of maybe the individuals that we part of the sport in the UK, it's normally the older individuals who might not be as physically active as maybe younger counterparts. So we looked at their moderate intensity minutes during their last session, so we just asked them to reflect on that. Then we took the average number of sessions that they do in a week, and then we used that to try and find out the sea angling contribution to physical activity. So we found that it's around about 10% of contribution to their recommended. But you have to remember as well, this could be 100% of their physical activity as well. So it is one of those things that you do have to think about. And then secondly, we looked at participant health and well-being. So the World Health Organization, we used something called the 5 Wellbeing Index, WHO5. So it asks these questions basically. So have I felt cheerful and in good spirits, felt calm and relaxed, felt active and vigorous, woke up feeling fresh and rested? My daily life has filled me with things that interest me. So what we asked them was, in the last 2 weeks, what was that score? How did they feel? And then we asked them as well, reflecting on their last sea angling session. So we found that basically when they were reflecting, just thinking about their last sea angling session, it significantly had improved their health and well-being score. So you can kind of see that shift where we've got general WHO5, so 0 is obviously the lowest mental health and well-being score that you can have, and 25 is the highest, and then you can see that shift in the responses when we ask them to reflect on their last sea angling session. Ooh. Great. So then we're thinking then on the next question, which was, are sea anglers connected to nature? So this was the Nature Connectedness Index scoring, where you ask these questions on how much they agree or disagree with these statements, and then you use that as well to determine what their connection to nature is. And we asked them generally what their connection to nature was, and then we asked them just reflecting on sea angling, so not their last sea angling session, just sea angling in general, so when they're there. And then we also found that this has a significant increase as well. So it's thinking about where they fit, but obviously the group itself was highly connected to nature in comparison to the general public. So we did a bit of different modelling as well to try and remove a bit of that bias. And then participant health and well-being. So what else do they do that could impact their health and well-being? So this was modelling that WHO5. So what other survey variables that we collected were driving that WHO5 high score when they were reflecting on their last sea angling session? I hope this comes up. So what we found is that generally when sea anglers take more breaks during their angling session, when they're away from people, so they don't see people, when they use lures, so both low and high physical activity as well, using lures, and being moderately physically active to get to where they fish, were all significant in improving their health and well-being when they're reflecting on their last sea angling session. So they were all the factors that came out, which obviously having that predictive variable. So my take-home messages from this are sea angling contributes on average at 13 minutes or 10% of that intense physical activity per week. So some could be 100% of their physical activity, others that might just be the 10% or less. And then sea anglers are generally older, so sea angling could have that significant contribution to their activity levels. Self-reported health and well-being is significantly increased when they reflect on their last sea angling session. And these are the following variables. So more breaks in your sea angling session, guys, being away from people, using those lures, and having a nice healthy walk to your site is probably that one. And then nature connectedness increases when you think about sea angling in general. Great, thank you very much. I don't know if I went over time, sorry.
No, stay where you are.
Oh, great.
Because you did it in 10 minutes exactly, and we
Nice.
have 15 minutes allocated. So I wonder if there's any question. Yes, we have a question from. Are you happy to take
Yeah, of course,
a couple
yeah.
of questions? Yeah.
Hi, Jackie Sharma from University of Canberra. Just wondering, when you say getting away from people, are they fishing with other people but then getting away from broader people?
No, fishing alone and getting away.
Fishing alone.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All about the isolated sport, this one.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There's another question in the room. Hold on. I think we have to have microphones so it's free.
So the anglers that you sampled, did that include anglers on foot and anglers in the boat? 'Cause I can
Yeah,
imagine
so
sometimes
this
boat
was,
anglers have a harder day.
Yeah, so they could, when they were reflecting on their last angling session, they told us whether or not it was shore, charter boat, private, kayak, things like that, and then we put that into the model, and it didn't come out as a possible variable which was impacting their health, so I didn't tell you about it.
There's two more questions, one at the front of the room and then one at the back.
My question is fishing with the sun out or fishing under cloudy conditions.
I did not ask that question.
Is there more benefit if you're fishing in sunshine than under cloudy conditions,
Yeah.
especially for older fishermen?
Yeah, to be honest, we didn't ask that in the survey. There's obviously a million variables we could ask, everything from, weather. I would generally guess in the UK it's not that sunny in comparison, but if you were to think of it maybe here, maybe so.
One more question in the back of the room.
Yeah, thanks. Being an Aussie who lives in the UK, I can confirm that it's rarely sunny.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the connection to nature. So did you collect quotes or what exactly were they?
Yeah, so that's an already established survey method. So it's peer-reviewed, published. And then we just took that method and applied it to our anglers. But all the methods that I've shown here have only been used generally or in the last 2 weeks, and then what we've done is applied that method to get them to think about sea angling and see if it has an impact.
Okay, yeah, it'd be great to learn more about what exactly it is.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
With.
I'm happy to share it all.
All right, cool, thanks.
Thank you. Are you happy to take one more, and then we'll open it for the rest of the panel to.
Really liked your talk. I was thinking about if you considered the element of nostalgia when you asked them to think about their last fishing experience. Because if you think about, I don't know, say doing your PhD, during it you don't really love it, but now thinking back at it, it was the best. So I was wondering if that kind of factored into your design and whether you considered how long ago was your last fishing experience.
We did, so we looked at a significant difference, and also we asked, quite interesting, we asked them to reflect in the last 2 weeks, and then we're reflecting on sea angling. So what happens if their last sea angling session was in the last 2 weeks? We've got these two variables. So we did consider all of that and looked at time difference, and we removed some when it was too far away or it was closer. But generally, you would think everyone likes their sport, hence that's why you go and do it, and you might have crappy days where you don't catch anything or the weather's terrible or whatever, but in general you still go out and do it. So on that motivation side, and that nostalgia side, what is driving you to keep doing it, and does it have that impact on your health and well-being, which we now have more proof to say yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for fielding all those questions.
Thank you.
Now I'd just like to firstly thank all the speakers for their great presentation. So just another round of applause for. Thank you. So we have time for panel discussion if everyone's willing to participate. John, Jane, and where is? Yes, there we are. Lucas and. We'll just leave just a couple of minutes for people to move to another room if they want to. So this is always a little bit tricky because some people were in the room for all the talks and some people were in the room only for a number of talks. So I'll just very briefly try and stitch together what I heard. So there were quite different talks, but there is a thread to the talks. And so we started off with James on artificial reefs, which I found absolutely fascinating, particularly the prospect of the hydrocarbon sort of structures to be used in the future. That's a big issue, or not issue, but it's a big thing to be a potential in the future. Then we had Jane from Tarfish, who talked about what you can do with a peak body if you want to make it work. And very interesting talk. And as I said to Jane when she finished her talk, it's very relevant for any peak body, I think. So I'm looking forward to reading the publication. We had Lucas, who operates in a very beautiful environment in the Seychelles, and fascinating talk on the catch and release stuff that you're doing there, Lucas, and particularly your pictures of the different species were incredible. Then we had John from New Zealand, John Holdsworth from Legacy, a not-for-profit, who talked about the things that you're involved in, and again, very informative because I was not aware of all the things that you guys do, and New Zealand's always very innovative when it comes to different programs, and particularly including, or not including, but taking note of the Maori influence on fishing. And lastly, we had Samantha Hook, who came into the room very late, but we managed to get there on time, and she finished in 10 minutes, so that was great, on health and well-being. So I'm happy to start off with a question, but first going to ask the panellists if they have any questions for each other. Is there any burning questions that you have? Otherwise, I'll open it up to the room. No?
I have a question for Samantha.
Yeah? Do you want to take the microphone before you get?
At least in the U.S., alcohol substances is a huge part of fishing. Was that part of your analysis or questionnaire? I would imagine it's the same in the U.K.
I would say it actually isn't.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we are known for drinking, but
Yeah.
I would say...
Yeah, in the pubs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever been on a fishing trip where they've drunk heavily.
Oh, you've got to come to the U.S., yeah.
I've seen it in the US before.
Or Western Australia.
Can I have any questions in the room for the panellists? Yes, please.
Yeah.
Hold on. You have to get the mic because it's recorded apparently. So.
I've got two now.
So I'm interested, Luke, you talked about the guys in the Seychelles adjusting their fishing in order to react to the research that you provided, and part of that was to change their fishing behavior, like create no fishing zones for themselves. So as a catch and release fishery, that's one thing, but as a catch and keep fishery, so I'm interested from New Zealand, from your group, if science showed, for example, that if you guys voluntarily change your spatial patterns on fishing that created no fishing zones, is your community like willing to do that kind of thing, to kind of translate? Yes. What he said, would that be translatable to what you guys would advocate for? I guess is my question.
We're advocating for a better ecosystem environmental standard throughout the whole place, and that we will support some marine protected areas and special areas. That's okay with that, but we're not advocating those as a fisheries management solution to the whole system. You've got to, you can't save 10% or 20% and shift all the effort into the 80% and say you've done your job. You've got to look after the 100% in our opinion. So would support some high protection areas, and there is customary tools to do that as well. So the Indigenous people, the local clan or hapu can designate their own area and make regulations for that area that excludes some fishing methods and things like that, and we're very supportive of that as a method of local management. Rather than the quota management system has enormous areas and no real restrictions on fishing methods, commercial fishing methods. It's an output control, not an input control. Does that answer it?
Yes, it does perfectly. Thank you. In general, the fishermen in the United States don't support that progressive approach. That's why I asked.
Any questions for any of the other panellists? At the back of the room, thank you.
Hi, my name. My question's for Jane regarding your research with peak bodies. When you were doing your research and examining the organisational risks that are acting as barriers, I'm curious to know what you found where these bodies have to meet the 4 pillars of compliance in Australia.
What are the 4 pillars of compliance?
They kind of merge all together, but they're around WHS, HR, Fair Work Act, stuff like that.
I wasn't looking predominantly at the internal operational application of some of those things. So what I was trying to look at in terms of the governance framework was one that had existed, that there were, what's what I'm looking for? Constitutions in place and the like. The level of sophistication amongst the peak bodies varied significantly based on how much capacity they had in their systems as well. So the leaner the organisation, so if you're working in an entirely voluntary capacity or you have part-time staff or no staff, then typically the level of sophistication of governance arrangements were lower. So I would suggest that if organisations do want to move from one place to another, then that's one of the important factors is trying to get all of those compliance mechanisms in place and doing that through your governance arrangements. And that's why I think it's also really important to seek funding and assistance to develop that. It's an issue that plagues most volunteer organisations, I would suggest.
Go to the room. I'll ask my follow-up question in a minute.
All right. I've got one for you, Samantha, around the findings you had about the role that lure use played in angler health. I'm just wondering what other characteristics were correlated with that. Is it just that they're fishing more actively, or were there any demographic angler characterization stuff that also relates to it?
Yeah, so we looked at intensity levels, so it didn't matter if it was low, moderate or high, but specifically low or moderate low activity was more significant. But I would have to get back to you because a lot of things didn't come out as any significant, but obviously it relates to a p-value, and that p-value might be 0.6 or something. And yeah, so yeah. I can send you over the results.
Great, thank you.
Why are you giving it back to me?
She was going to ask you a follow-up question.
Okay.
No, I'll go to the room first. Yes, there's a question in there. Thank you.
Hi, Samantha. Another one for you. Sorry.
Yeah.
So whilst understanding that the connection to nature was an existing measure that you use, do you think that the connection to nature that anglers have in your study and more broadly extends to a connection to nature more broadly and into the realm of pro-environmental behaviour, or that it's kind of limited to the experience they have when they're out?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And Tom, who is a collaborator on this, is actually about to publish a paper more specifically on that. Because obviously you've got this, in the UK, for example, we have this issue of anglers specifically not liking more charismatic, generally charismatic species such as otters and seals. Yeah, there's quite a lot of conservation projects for those kind of species. So it is really interesting to understand whether it's just the fish that they're interested in, the habitats themselves, or further afield. And I think you could do a whole PhD on that if you really wanted to, so, which I do not. So.
My apologies, I didn't catch every one of your sessions. James, I was absolutely rapt to see people taking an approach to something from a left-of-centre approach and saying, instead of there's a problem with something being there, what can we do with it? That's inspiring, should be inspiring to everywhere. And I really touched, when you touched at the end upon finding a space between nothing and everything, I think that's hopefully what we like to do as Australians, you know, to take the information that's been given elsewhere. My question is actually for John, but it's broadly for the whole process of this idea of what a peak body is and how it operates the best and how it was set up and how did it evolve or whatever else. And you used the word trust a few times. And I think it's a really underused, a very, very important word in these things, because as a recreational fisher, I think there's still a massive disconnect between where you are and where the government bodies are and where the recreational fisher is. And I said something about it in another session today, and I nearly got my head bitten off by someone that I shouldn't have been fearful of. But I think the recreational fishers are scared of providing their information in many cases, and they really shouldn't be long term. But logic doesn't apply when you say to a recreational fisher, give me all your information and trust me that I'll handle it correctly. And there's instances in the past of people, marine parks being set up where people's favourite fishing spots were where the most fish were found. And you seem to be traversing that as we speak, to me. Would that be correct?
A little bit. I'll go to the peak body first. We're not a peak body. We had a peak body that fell over because it didn't have any funding.
We spoke about this last time.
Yeah, so... and I'm not sure all recreational fishers trust legacy necessarily, but we're in the field where we're going to try and get fair decisions, I guess, when there's a fisheries management change, and there's trust that we can, if something is actually not right, there's something wrong with the way that the process is working, that there's a chance for recreational fishers at least to get their voice heard, and that's about all we can do, I guess. There will be management changes, and there have been, significant cuts in bag limits at times and things like that, and generally people get it, as long as when the fishery rebuilds, that they're also getting a part of that, benefit. It doesn't all go to one sector or the other, it's sort of shared. And I think that's more or less where we come from.
And do you think being part of that input is important too?
The allocation stuff's really critical, yeah, and we're engaged in some of the processes, but there's very few management processes, collaborative processes in New Zealand. It's more of a black box sort of consultation process, but where possible, we do participate and get paid to go in there rather than just as volunteers as well, which is important to.
I'm not suggesting there's any deliberate disconnect between any groups. I just think that I see it as a real shame as a recreational angler, and I'm now working vaguely in the sector as well. There's an amazing amount of information at the hands of the person who's holding the rod. Huge amounts of information. Like in Victoria, we might have 5,000 fishers and providing data, if that. We've got hundreds of thousands of fishers that are having that experience, and we could be using their data and their information and their everything. And how we got it to that is a big question for me. How could we get that, allow people to give that information to our representative bodies, whether it be governments or the peak bodies or whoever, and knowing that it was going to help us all in the long run.
I think that there's quite a few sessions, I think, on exactly that fisher participation in data gathering and co-managing that data as well. And I take your point, and I think it's a really important one. I would like to give just the opportunity for 2 more questions, one to Lucas and one to James, if we haven't. So sorry to interrupt you, but I think, yeah, very relevant.
It's a good point, but yeah, we'll have a discussion later.
Yeah.
Hi, I've got a question for James, actually, 2, if you don't mind. The first, and this is coming from a UK perspectives, where if we talk about artificial reefs, 2 things tend to come up. One is how do you stop commercial fisheries having access to these artificial reefs? And secondly, what evidence do you have that they increase productivity or biomass and don't simply just work as fish aggregating devices?
Yeah, great questions. So the first around commercial fishing, the Commonwealth application process and sort of act that governs these artificial reefs does it purely for recreational purposes or environmental. But in WA, we have no issue, there's nothing saying commercials can't access them. And, a lot of them could and may in the future with fish traps and that sort of thing. But a lot of the time, these are done pretty close to population sources and strong rec fishing communities, and they sort of govern themselves. And I think the sort of respect between the commercials and recreational fishers in those towns, they just wouldn't access those areas. And a lot of time, they're also, pretty small and close to shore at the moment for that sort of scale. So we haven't really had any conflict yet. It may happen in the future, but in WA particularly, it's been pretty fine. The second question we get a lot, and I could talk about that all day, but in the context of our artificial reef program, there's a lot of science around minimum productive size, and that's around 400 cubic metres. So we make sure all our reefs are at that size as a minimum requirement. One of the reasons we put the concrete modules around these repurposed structures is we don't actually know how these repurposed steel structures will work. We know anecdotally it's a giant steel thing with all this amazing habitat. How could they not work? But from a regulator point of view, there's no science on these specific structures in our waters yet. So we always make sure we have the minimum 400 cubic metres of the concrete purpose-built modules as well. And then that's how we ensure that they do remain productive. But a lot of our studies do use stereo bruvs, so we're starting to look at biomass changes and that sort of thing too. So it is on the increase.
Thank you, Lucas. Now, we're eating into our afternoon tea, but I feel like we need to ask Lucas one question. So either, yeah.
I'll answer it very quickly.
Very quickly.
Just because
Thank you.
This is on. I was just curious about, like, Lucas, how did you get the blood work out of such a remote location? I mean, it was an incredible amount of studies that you did there, but it's so remote. How did you get that out of there, and what labs did you use to get that kind of information back?
Yeah, so it's just all basic things you can bring on a plane. So we did it all in the field. We didn't spin any plasma or anything. We didn't look at cortisol that would be needed in the lab. So it's all field techniques that we've done in other fisheries as well, and like rapid assessment work.
Great. Just one last round of applause for the speakers. Thank you.